Gracias a todos. Muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí. Me presento nuevamente para los que no me conocen, aunque tal vez ya algunos de ustedes ya me han visto en persona, pero mi nombre es Alex Rendón y soy el nuevo miembro de Buen Trip Ventures y estoy a cargo de apoyar en todo lo que es el proceso de inversiones. El día de hoy tengo el gusto de presentarles este B2B Talks. Sí, gracias. Tengo el gusto de presentarles a ustedes a Andrea Wang, quien va a ser nuestra speaker el día de hoy. Les doy solo una breve introducción antes de pasar la palabra a Andrea y de ahí vamos a cambiar de idioma también al inglés. Entonces, simplemente para que conozcan un poco más de Andrea, ella actualmente es Senior Growth Product Manager en Amplitude, que es una plataforma de analítica que está enfocada a potenciar el crecimiento de empresas mediante los productos digitales. Entonces ahí hay un enfoque muy especial. Ella está principalmente involucrada en todo lo que es la activación y el onboarding del cliente, la monetización y el crecimiento del pipeline de ventas en torno a lo que es el producto. Previo a esto, también trabajó en Line como Product Manager y, entre otros roles, también acompañó a la compañía de una serie A serie D. Adicionalmente, Andrea es mentora de producto en First Round Capital, una organización que junta a personas de emprendimientos tempranos con personas de más experiencia dentro de su industria. Y también es cofundadora del Lizard Institute, una ONG que brinda oportunidades de intercambio con China. Entonces, esto es algo que ella creó desde sus inicios en Stanford y Oxford, donde ella tuvo la oportunidad de estudiar economía y historia del arte. Entonces tiene un perfil de con mucha amplitud y también cuenta con un máster de Stanford en manejo de tecnología e ingeniería. Y por último, también les cuento que Andrea es una inversionista ángel con enfoque nuevamente en emprendimientos tempranos y hoy nos va a hablar un poquito más de Product-Led Growth. Entonces, ahorita sí me cambio a inglés. Andrea, thank you for your patience and for allowing us to make a quick intro in Spanish for all our audience. And now we hand it over to you, if you will, so you can share with us a little bit more about product-led growth.
Thanks, Alex. I think you had a very comprehensive intro, so I'm going to skip my background. But just to introduce myself, currently I'm growth product lead at Amplitude, have been there from Series D to a direct listing and beyond. And my role at the company is to drive product-led growth. And I'm going to talk more about what that means and organizationally where this sits at Amplitude and what are some different structures, org designs that I have seen elsewhere, especially for startups. I am an active angel investor and also advisor to pre-seed and seed stage consumer and enterprise startups. And on my LinkedIn, you can see a list of my past investments and previously have experience in consumer marketplace, startup Lime, management consulting, and investment banking. So that's a high level overview of my background. So today I want to spend some time talking about product-led growth. It's a very popular terminology these days. A lot of companies like to say they are a product-led company, but what does it really mean? And going to introduce two frameworks that companies typically use to drive growth and drive product-led growth. And I'm going to talk about the pros and cons and which one I recommend companies think about in terms of their product-led growth. And then the last piece, I suspect it's going to be a really popular topic, which is hiring for growth at the early stage, especially at seed, Series A, Series B. A lot of companies like to think about hiring for a growth lead or head of growth super early on, but I've seen some misconceptions and maybe areas founders need help with in thinking about who should I hire as the head of growth, what type of background should they have, and where do I source those people. So I'm going to go in depth into that topic as well. So main presentation is going to be 20 minutes, and majority of the time today will be Q&A. So feel free to raise your hand at any point during the presentation, or reserve it at the end as well. So without further ado, I want to dive into the concept of product-led growth. What is product-led growth? This is my favorite definition out there by OpenView partners. Product-led growth is an end-user focused growth model that focuses on the product itself as the primary driver of customer acquisition, conversion, and expansion. So several things to call out here. First of all, it's end-user focused. In B2B especially, there's usually an archetype of the buyer and the end user. So you typically as a company sell into companies, but the product itself is used by end users. And when we think about product-led growth, how you structure these experiences and frame your growth model is very much end user focused. So that's one key call out. And the second one is you're using the product itself to acquire, convert, and expand your customers, as opposed to using marketing levers or sales reps to convert and acquire these customers. And I'm going to talk about specific examples of products out there that do this well today to give you a better sense of what this actually means. But ultimately, when a company says they are a product-led company, I want to see some evidence that the product itself is actually capable of acquiring users through existing users, inviting other users into the product, and that the product itself is self-monetizable. And typically you can see how much a company is product-led by looking at the share of the total revenue that's contributed by your product channel versus your marketing and sales channels. So that's a high-level concept of product-led growth. And now I'm going to talk about two tactical frameworks that teams usually use to think about improving their growth in their product. One is called loops, and one is called funnels. So when we think about a typical funnel, the R funnel in a company that you may have heard of before, companies usually think of marketing as the department that owns acquisition. Their KPI is usually traffic, number of marketing qualified leads, and their primary charter is to leverage their various marketing channels to acquire new users or leads into the company. And after a user signs up for the product function typically takes over and is responsible for activating these customers, making sure they have a great user experience and stay retained. And sales as a function, typically their KPI is revenue. So they're thought of the function that closes the sale and over time expand them. So that's one view of looking at your growth model for a company. But want to present the alternative. You may have heard of this concept of a growth loop before, but this is a concept pioneered by Reforge, a professional development organization for tech professionals. And the way they think about a growth loop is that when you think about the different levers driving your user acquisition, retention, and monetization, you should be able to find areas in a product where you have a new user signing up, and that user performs a series of actions that generate some sort of output. And that output can directly feed back into the input, leading to additional users being brought into the product, or them performing some sort of action that leads to this loop compounding over time and self-sustaining without any marketing and sales intervention. So this is an example of a product-led growth loop where your users are doing the work of acquiring other users on your behalf without any headcount in your company in any department necessarily doing that work. So this framework I will illustrate with some concrete examples of products out there that are doing a good job of this today, so that you can have a very concrete picture of what this actually means. So funnels and loops are very different, because when you think about funnels, it has a series of steps that has a conversion loss in between each step. And then the concept of a growth loop it's more circular versus linear in terms of the way you think about how your product grows. So just want to take a quick poll with all of you. Which one do you think is better in thinking about your growth model, funnels or loops? Feel free to jot down your thought in the Zoom chat. Let me know if this is unclear or if you need clarifications on one of these concepts. Don't be shy. Any answer is okay.
We're getting a lot of messages in the chat. So a lot of people are saying loop, mostly loop, and then someone commented that at the beginning, a funnel would be easier to measure, but after that, loop. So a lot of activity in the chat.
Oh, awesome. For some reason, I'm unable to see what's going on in the chat, but thanks for letting me know. Yeah, a lot of you are absolutely right. At least, even though there's no right answer, a lot of, if you ask a lot of the growth executives out there, these days, a very popular framework is the concept of a loop. The reason why that is a better framework is when you think about a funnel, it has a beginning and an end. Your beginning of the customer journey for acquisition, it starts with a large pool of leads or traffic, top of funnel. And then every single stage afterwards, it gets smaller and smaller over time. A certain percentage of your acquired leads turn into actual signups, and you can activate a fraction of them, and then a fraction of them retain, and ultimately a smaller fraction of that turn into revenue or expand with you over time. It's a very linear way of thinking about how a company grows that only gets smaller over time. Whereas if you look at growth loops, let's use Slack as an example. It's a multiplayer mode productivity app, and it starts with someone signing up for Slack. And the first user will create a new workspace. And this product is not really useful unless there are multiple people collaborating within it. So that user is going to proactively add other teammates and bring people into the product. And those users who previously didn't have access or exposure to Slack before would go on to become Slack users. So it's a very self-sustaining compounding loop that is very cost efficient because the end users themselves are doing the work of acquiring users for you versus you having to invest in additional marketing dollars, campaigns, and sales reps to be able to acquire these users. And another example of a growth loop out there is Amplitude, the product that I manage. So Amplitude is a B2B SaaS product analytics product where product teams instrument what users are doing in your product, and you're able to perform all sorts of analytics on why they're engaged and how and where are they engaged in your product. So for a product like this, it starts with a user joining Amplitude, creating an account, and they typically go through an instrumentation phase and instrument some events that track what actions users are performing in your product. And someone on that team is going to create a series of charts to analyze that user behavior. And once these insights are created inside Amplitude, usually our users don't keep it to themselves because in the context of a product team, you usually like to collaborate with others in the product team to discuss hypotheses you might have about users and leverage these insights for actual product development. So you will end up sharing those insights with other colleagues, which results in additional users in the company joining your product and start using it. So that's why growth loops are preferred to funnels as a way of thinking about your growth, especially in the current economic climate when unit economics, when cost efficiency is really important, because it's a very low cost way of acquiring additional users and growing your product over time. We believe that product-led companies ultimately win by building for growth, because today there is very low barriers to enter any particular segment. There are usually a lot of existing players. So we believe that if you're being really product-led, you're building a moat that ultimately will help you win in that category and grow faster than alternative players that don't think and grow in this way. There's also a lot of choices out there. So users usually prefer products that have a superior user experience. And typically that means self-serve products where they could figure out how to use it by themselves without necessarily having to talk to a sales rep or read a bunch of docs to be able to understand how to use. And there are a lot of products out there like Netflix, Zappos, Peloton that do a really great job at this and demonstrating why product-led companies can win in their categories. So now I'm going to go into a topic that I suspect will be top of mind for many of you, is how should you approach hiring for growth as a function? When is the right time to hire? Who should you hire in terms of the profiles and background they come from? And some pros and cons of each. So these are some typical questions I hear from founders, especially in the early stage, because growth is always a priority, but especially in the early stage when you're thinking about the next fundraise, you typically hear some targets from VCs. Oh, for Series A, we want to see this amount of growth rate year over year, month over month, or this amount of user retention. So growth is always top of mind for founders like you all. So you might be thinking, when should I hire a head of growth or a lead in that function, and what type of profile should I look for? And this is how I like to recommend founders think about when is the right time to hire and what type of profile you should go after. So this is actually coming from the growth executive at Amplitude that I work with on a daily basis, Alina Verna. And there's a blog post around this that you can read more about on Lenny's newsletter. The first step of thinking about hiring for growth as a function is you need to have a growth model. And this is something that founders should not outsource to an outside consultant, advisor, or an outside hire, because you're the one who built the company, you know the ins and outs of your company, and no one else understands how you grow more than the founder yourself. So what that means is really thinking about how you are growing right now, starting with the first customer that you have acquired, the traffic that you're getting on your website or a mobile app, really analyzing where is all that traffic and acquired customers come from? Which channel are they driven by? Is it through marketing channels, organic Google search or paid ads? Is it through sales channel? Is it driven by the sales reps proactively outbounding customers or inbound interest? Or is it driven by the product? Are you seeing that your first users are spreading the word about the product, they're sharing on social channels, and that actually drives additional signups. So the first pass of this is the founding team taking a look at your earliest customers, how you're growing today, and have a view of where you're growing and which is your most dominant channel. But in order to do that, you must have data. So in order to know where your traffic is coming from, you need the data to back it up. So a lot of people use products like Amplitude since day zero, when ever since you start building your digital product, or you might be using Google Analytics that breaks down your different channels and where your traffic comes from and how they convert to signups. regardless of what tool you use, you must have some historical data, and you should be tracking this as early as possible, as soon as you start building your product, so that you have some historical view of how your different channels have evolved over time and where you're acquiring users. And after you do number one and number two, you can start putting together a model more quantitatively. For the first pass, since you're on your own and don't really have any help from a specialist, you don't have to make it overly complicated. Typically, you just need to have 3 dimensions of this growth model. One is acquisition, one is retention, and one is monetization. For acquisition, is really simple. You're tracking period over period, whether it's weekly, monthly, or yearly, how your users are growing, which channels you're acquiring them from. For retention, charting on a cohort basis, how do people retain over time? And for monetization, tracking down your maybe contract size over time and percentage of your customer base that retain on their original contract or expand on their contract value over time, so that you have a base growth model. But again, this doesn't have to be overly complicated. And after you have done the groundwork of figuring out your base growth model, at this point, you know, my company's growth is driven by, let's say, marketing, or today we're acquiring all of our customers through sales. Or you might say we are actually a very bottoms-up product-led company, and there's limited like marketing spend, sales outbound activity. It's actually primarily driven by word of mouth or referrals from our existing users. That will help you pinpoint what type of talent, what type of person should you hire to lead growth in the early stages. Because if you are a sales-led company, you don't want to hire a product manager, someone who comes from a very solid product background to drive your growth, because that person doesn't have experience in direct sales. If you're a very bottoms-up growth company, then you don't want to hire someone who's coming from a sales background, because that person doesn't know product development and how to engineer some of the growth levers in the product. So that's one piece. The other piece is, while it might be tempting to optimize for seniority in the first hire, it's actually not necessary, and in many cases results in less optimal outcome than if you hire for a builder who is willing to roll up their sleeves, run a lot of experiments, validate your model assumptions, and really really reaping the benefits of a lot of low-hanging fruit that typically in the early stages of a growth team they would be able to find. Because a very senior executive who is already a director, a VP of growth somewhere, they typically want to come in and drastically innovate on their growth model. But what you need in the early stages is actually a builder, someone who definitely can manage a small team, but first and foremost can do a lot of IC work of, for example, like mapping out your growth model, refining it, improving it, and running tons of experiments to validate hypotheses. But that type of talent is very difficult to find, because growth is a very emerging and niche function still. Growth as a domain only has existed for about a decade. So there are not that many growth talent out there in the market to hire. And as a result, a lot of companies find it helpful to prioritize your internal talent, someone in the organization that has adjacent skill sets and has the appetite to learn growth. So typically some of the adjacent functions that you might want to hire from include product management, marketing, sales, data, and analytics is a great function, because growth is a very data-driven domain. You need to be very data fluent. And even finance and finance could be a great one, because sometimes you're dealing with these growth modeling that someone from maybe like a management consulting or investment banking background could be a good fit for. And for me personally, since I have hired a lot of growth engineers, product managers, and designers at Amplitude, I like to look for certain personality traits as well outside of that. For example, someone who's competitive and is driven by having quantifiable business impact. That's why sometimes I find that people coming from banking and consulting background actually could be a good fit for growth as a domain, because they're really driven by the business side of things, are data driven, and are also competitive. So they want to prove themselves by achieving the next growth target. So prioritizing homegrown talent usually is very recommended if immediately in your network you're having trouble identifying outside talent to hire. And then finally, after you have found someone, or ideally before you hire that person, you need to figure out where growth sits in an organization. That's another piece that you will see wide variance across companies. Some companies create growth as its own organization that sits in parallel with marketing, sales, and product, and the VP of growth will report into the CEO. In some companies, you will find growth talent rolls up into marketing, and in some companies, you would find them report into sales or product. So it's all over the place, and companies sometimes switch back and forth over time. So which org design is better? And the answer is really like looking at your growth model again. Again, going back to the point of figuring out how you're growing. Are you a marketing-led company? Are you a sales-led company in terms of your go-to-market motion? Or are you a product-led company? And that is usually a pretty good start to help you figure out, for example, for the first marketer, growth marketer that I'm hiring, who should that person report into? Is it the head of marketing or the head of product? So that's the final piece about where you should have that role sit in the org. And that's primarily guided by your growth model. So yeah, we've gone through this already. I know that I have talked a lot about growth hiring, and there's a lot of nuance here that I suspect many of you may have all sorts of questions around. So so now I will open up for questions, and also just want to call out that since I'm an angel investor and also advisor, always happy to connect with anybody who have questions as it comes up when it comes to your growth strategy and also hiring for growth. So happy to be of resource and stay in touch with you all. And yeah, we'll open up for any question that any of you have.
Thank you, Andrea. That was really insightful. We already have some questions. So if you please raise your hand, we'll take them as they come. So Francisco, please go ahead with your question, and then we'll go from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea. That was really insightful indeed. My question comes from the beginning of your presentation. So you talk about product-led as being something not directly impacted by marketing. So the product itself bringing new customers. My concern as a company is that you can think on the Storybook pretty much the same way like Headspace or Calm. We are a subscription-based consumer app. The same business model, basically. But as we see our growth loop, it has to do with paid acquisition. As of now, that's what works the best. So it is marketing indeed. And we're investing what the revenue that we get, we invest it back. We see that as our loop. What we sell through paid ads, that's our growth channel. We invest it back into the same channel. However, that wouldn't be product-led specifically. We are adapting the product to the channel, so we are making the app the best it can be for that specific growth channel, but we are not growing by the product itself. So one thing that, and this is my question, one thing that we've been trying to do for a while is to get a referral program in place. Because of the nature of our app, it's really hard to get people to share that moment because Storybook is meant for the parent and the child, the parent and their kids. their kids before bedtime. It's a really intimate moment, and that's something you want to naturally share. So we've been struggling a lot with referral programs or things like that. So any suggestions on how to do it, unless we don't have to really take care of that, and focusing on our growth loop is the best way to go.
Yeah, so first of all, referral is a type of growth loop. Not sure what type of experiments you have run in the past. Have you run any run any experiments about referrals in the past?
Yes, and we are big fans of Amplitude. So we A/B test everything that we do, and we tried 2 iterations already of our referral program. Basically, if you share a storybook with someone else, you unlock new stories, new content. We tried 2 iterations of that, and none of them really worked, so we took them out.
Why do you think it didn't work?
We have our hypothesis about that. The first time we thought there wasn't enough visibility for that feature. The second time we put a lot of visibility, but it didn't seem to be interest. So I don't know if Angelica is around here. She was running that experiment, I think. But ultimately, for me, it is. I'm not interested. I'm not getting money because of this. It's not a line where you're interested about the cash. You're interested about this benefiting your child, and adding new content might be not a good enough incentive. Ultimately, I think it's the ultimate incentive for this kind of app is I'm seeing results, and if I see results, I can share that with my community. So we haven't really figured it out. Yeah,
I think what you're pointing out is something that I suspect other companies will face as well. Like sometimes you can't find really compelling product-led growth loops to focus on, and it might make more sense for you to focus on the marketing-led growth loops. And the ones that you mentioned are definitely growth loops. They're just not like product-driven ones. So for different business models, product-led might not be the way to go. But the point is to understand why product-led doesn't work and really experiment and learn from it. So my advice on the referral program would be, it's great that you have already tried some experiments in that realm. There might be some other reasons that I can think of. For example, the timing of when the referral messaging comes from, the channels that it's being triggered, of why that might not work. I wonder also if the team has also done some qualitative user research as well to dig deeper into the motivation versus simply looking at the quantitative data from the experiment itself, to better understand from a qualitative standpoint, what do the users themselves say why they're not doing it. And after you have done all that and you still conclude that this is just not like intrinsic motivation that users have, then then don't focus on that. It seems like you have other well-working growth loops that you should be working on instead. So I think one principle about growth is always double down on what's already working. Experiment with new loops always to catch the ones that you may have missed, but always double down on what's already working.
That's awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Great question. So next up, we have Yoshi, please.
Awesome, cool. Hey, Andrea, thank you so much for all the knowledge that you shared. To give you context, I'm Jose, founder of AirPulse. We are a tech and logistics company based out of Brooklyn, New York, and we help teams to make their local logistics easier. So essentially, we've been growing similar to Francisco, but we notice there is an organic growth, right? Once a user from a company, similar to Slack, once a user starts to use AirPulse, then they use it to send something to a different coworker or an external client. So then that person gets into our platform, and we see sometimes, later on, this new person using their platform again. So that's great. But my question is, there is a lot of information about product-led growth out there, and for some reason I think founders, we know we have to do this, but it is so hard. Why do you think it's hard for startups to do this, that we all know we all know need to be doing?
Yeah, I think growth is a very specialized domain. It's very different from marketing, very different from sales and product management. It's its own domain that's so new and no one knows much about it. So I think that's why the supply of the talent out there that you can hire is so low. But fortunately, I think that there are more and more resources that, for example, helped me learn product-led growth from scratch. I would say it was only 3 years ago that I started, when I stepped into this role at Amplitude, that I started learning all about growth. I started reading the blog posts by Andrew Chen, Brian Balfour, and took a ton of programs and cohorts at Reforge, the professional development program that I mentioned, which also has a program for founders and has some overview programs on how you should think about growth. And I personally learned it that way. It wasn't through anyone internally in the company. Was, I think, finding these resources out there that help you get a sense of how you should be thinking about it. And I can say that anyone can think about it because I learned from scratch only 3 years ago. So I think it's all about identifying where you should seek out resources from, which I'm happy to share with you all after this event. And also, I think lastly, growth as a domain is requires some specific skill sets. So it's very quantitative, very data driven. So in order to do this well, there is a set of skill sets that are required to be able to, for example, map out all your growth levers using analytics tools out there. Step by step, when you think about the viral acquisition loop that I mentioned with Slack, for example, each step exactly how the input leads to an action, but how that output feeds back into the input. So there's this type of also like hard skill set that is required to do growth that I think it's just something that you need to learn and develop over time as well. So that's my take on why it's hard.
Thank you. If you don't mind, one more question. So you have a very special experience, right, as an operator and as an investor. So when we are in early stage and we need to, build the technology, but also grow, how do you think founders in early stage, if there is something that you can share about how to balance both? Because, at some point we heard from investors, oh, you have to focus. You cannot many things at the same time, but at the same time, we need to show that we're investable, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. Especially, founders are the busiest people in the world and you have to wear so many different hats. So prioritization is really important. I would say it depends on what stage of the company you're at and what type of help you have. So I think about the team competency, not just yourself, but who you have on your team. So if you're before Series A, you haven't found product market fit yet. At that point, the top priority is finding product market fit, and the sort of activities that I think you should be prioritizing is like a lot of customer discovery, talking to a lot of customers, helping them set up the product to get firsthand experience. Sometimes even reading customer support tickets. You shouldn't be spending time doing a ton of modeling because there's no data yet, or if you have a really competent technical co-founder who is a really great product thinker and you can outsource a lot of the product development and even like the implementation work to your co-founder, maybe that frees you up a little bit more to think about to be in a more sales role, a more growth role. So that depends on who else is on your team, what can they do, and also what stage of the company. Should growth be a priority, or should something else like finding product market fit before Series A be the top priority? And also type of resources you have, because if you have a little bit more resources, maybe you could hire an advisor that is specialized in growth, or hire an outside talent at some point as well to help you out.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you so much. We have Juan Bernardo.
Hi, Andrea. How are you? My name is Juan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Authority. Just a quick intro about Authority. We're a B2C super app where we allow vehicle owners to manage and make all of their payments related to their car, such as their traffic tickets, parking, toll roads, and all that. And I have two questions for you today. We have the other side of the problem. 75% of our users have come from referrals from existing users. And right now we're starting to work with some digital marketing agencies on the side. And I see them completely focused on a funnel strategy, not on the loop strategy. What has been your experience on to combine both of the worlds, right? And to work alongside with the marketing agencies to think on the loop strategy, not on the funnel strategy. And my second question is, right now we have a lot of tools to measure data, like you were saying, and we have like 3 or 4 subscription platforms like Google Analytics, we have Mixpanel, and most of them, but it's kind of overwhelming to have so much data and so many spaces. What is your recommendation to kind of aggregate or give a priority to certain platforms to have everything under control?
Yeah. Great question. So on the first piece about the digital marketing agency and how to think about in loops, I think it's hard to train or like have an outside, like almost contracting agency operate in a fundamentally different way. I find that someone internal in your company, a full-time person who actually like is in the trenches and cares about the outcome of your company, should adopt that mindset first. Make sure that person understands how loops work, and that person should work very closely with the marketing agency to get their help in maybe operationalizing some of the experiments that the internal person thinks of, and offers outside support. Because it's not something that you should be outsourcing to a contractor. It's very difficult to tell the agency, hey, like you should be thinking about in this way when they don't have any sort of background. So I think the best way to start might be training someone internal in your company, having that person learn everything about loops and understand how it works, come up with some strategies and ways that you want that person, that you want certain experiments to run, or you want to track certain things, and then have the agency deal with the tactical stuff. Because yeah, that's something that I think someone who cares deeply about the success of the company should take on versus an agency to begin with. And then the second question around the different analytics tools. Yeah, definitely. I think we've experienced the problem ourselves at Amplitude. When you look at the data points across these different tools, you see different numbers, and at some point, like you can't run the company when like the marketing team is looking at Google Analytics, the product team looks at Amplitude, and you're not even speaking about the same language. So tool consolidation is definitely needed. I think it depends on which tool you find serves the majority of your use cases. Because if you can track your traffic and page views and signups in Amplitude, and you can track your product engagement data that's deeper in the funnel all in Amplitude, my question is, why are you still using Google Analytics? Is there anything you're using Google Analytics for that you can't be doing with Amplitude? So I think the best way to make sure you use minimal amount of tools and make sure that you have a good data quality, because at some point, if you have too many tools, no one's paying close attention to, for example, is the number correct in these platforms? Because these things have to be like really closely paid attention to. Otherwise, over time, the data quality might not even be there for you to get meaningful insights out of these tools. So I would recommend examining the use cases that you can cover within each tool and figure out which tool can cover the most number of use cases, so that you can deprecate some other tools that don't serve you very well anymore.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you very much. I think we had some other hands before. So maybe Juan Daniel or Jacobo, I think I saw some hands were up.
Hi, Alex. Yes, I had the same question about how to deal with all the bunch of tools that are out there. And yes, my question was very similar than the one from Juan Bernardo about, for example, what should be or what could be the difference between mixed panel and an amplitude and all this bunch of tools that we have out there. Even sometimes I have this confusion with segment that seems to be a hub of metrics from all of them. So yes, it was very similar than the question from Juan Bernardo. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, go ahead, Andrea, please.
Oh, yes, just to address the difference between Amplitude mixed panel. We're in the same product category. We're both doing product analytics, but recently Amplitude started launching some new product lines that maybe I will just briefly mention. We launched a customer data platform, a CDP, just like Segment. So we're trying to be the data platform that also helps you federate your data into and out of different data sources. And recently, we also launched an experimentation and feature flagging tool, just like Optimizely and LaunchDarkly. So you could manage your feature rollouts and run experiments with Amplitude, and then you can analyze the results in our analytics product as well. So Amplitude is going towards the direction where you could increasingly rely on it as the single source of truth data, and also manage your product development process around it. Whereas mixed panel today is solely focused on the product analytics category, which Amplitude also plays in as well. And you're right about Segment. I think their primary role is to federate your data around from different sources into others.
Sounds great, Andrea. And just give me one single validation. I'm not sure if I'm right with this, but Segment is a kind of hub of information that sorts all the information from different sources. So what you are doing with Amplitude is the same. You are pursuing the part from the analytics, from the product analytics, and the consolidation of all the information in one single source of truth. I'm right?
Yeah. Segment allows you to store and also send those events or data to other tools as well. So they also support tons of other data sources and allow you to send those data to other places.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
You. Any other questions? If not, I might jump in with one question. Andrea, so when you read a little bit about growth, sometimes they say, oh, don't put growth in a box. It's everyone's job. And so you had mentioned that you kind of have to think about, are you a sales-led company and where growth might fit into that structure. So my question is, if you have any examples or insights into how to rally different areas of the companies that might have different priorities to kind of think together, and maybe if that involves a North Star metric or any other insight you can share into how to rally different segments to think about growth.
Yeah, definitely. We've experienced it ourselves at Amplitude when we realized that, I think, as mentioned before, we had a dedicated growth team for a couple of years now, but we're now in a more mature stage where we want to make every product team think about growth and have them make sure they build new products and features in a way that is self-activating, self-monetizable. So one thing that we found helpful is having that coming from leadership and setting that expectation that this is not the growth team's job only, and that every product team should be operating in that way, making sure that when you're building new features, you should be thinking about, do we have enough of a feature education that an end user would understand how to use this feature instantly without necessarily following up with help documentation, marketing communications, or even handholding from your sales engineering team. And the other piece, around the metrics, the way it has worked for Amplitude is our North Star metric, it has been weekly learning users. So it's a concept where in Amplitude, you have users consuming insights and share insights with other colleagues. So weekly learning user is number of users whose analysis are shared and viewed by at least 2 other users in the same organization. So that is the company level North Star. And then we kind of break that metric down into some of the input levers, such as number of users creating content, number of users sharing content, number of customers or organizations that send data into Amplitude, which produces these active users that ultimately will create content and share content. And those different input levers are kind of distributed in terms of responsibility to different product teams. So we would have one team focus on driving the send data piece, making sure that customers are able to send data because we support all types of data sources, SDKs, and that we designed that part of the experience well. And other product teams are held accountable for coming up with solid analytics features that would enable more users to create more insights. And there's another product pillar that focuses on the content distribution piece of how easy we can make it share, make sure that the users share content broadly across the organization. So, so I do think that metrics is a great lever. So identifying a good North Star metric that inherently reflects your growth strategy, and break it down into multiple input levers that ideally all parts of the organization are held accountable to, at least like one piece of it. And in this way, you can make sure that every single department in the organization is driving at least part of that overall product-led growth strategy.
Awesome, awesome. That was super insightful. Thank you so much. Any other questions from the group? Anyone else have any questions? Any follow-ups? If not, I think we'll just round it up with one last question. Oh, Rodrigo, please go ahead.
Well, thank you for your time and for the content. Just one quick question, like, who shouldn't consider like this product-led growth mindset and activities? What type of startups shouldn't be working on this?
Yeah, so the quick answer is every startup, but maybe there are some niche industry verticals or business models where product-led growth doesn't make sense. But I think the first step is learning about all types of product-led growth loops. For example, the acquisition loop that I mentioned isn't the only one. So product-led growth isn't only driven by users inviting other users. So you could easily think of products where it's a single player mode product and users like don't have any use case to bring other users back into the product, and that's completely fine. You may be able to think of alternative product-led growth loops, such as, for example, content sharing. And there are certain network effects product where if there are more users on the platform, there is bigger benefits that the individual user will get from being on the platform. So there are all these types of product-led growth loops that you should think about beyond the simple like invite virality loop, and then see if it applies to any part of your product. And yeah, it is quite possible that maybe for very small number of products and business models out there that it just doesn't make sense.
Great, thanks for the answer.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you so much. Okay, so with that, I think unless we have anyone else with that wants to jump in with a last quick question, I think we can end it here. So thank you, Andrea, so much for your time, for the insights, and for teaching us a little bit more about product-led growth. And hopefully for the portfolio and the community, this is something that helps you think in a different way. I think that was really one of the takeaways I took of this. So thank you very much, Andrea. And thank you everyone for coming to our talks. We hope you get a lot out of this space.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and feel free to follow up and keep in touch.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Andrea.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.